Not only is the AFC North one of the most competitive when it comes to real-life NFL action, it is also incredibly relevant from a fantasy point of view, especially for our redraft leagues. We've done the Ravens, and now we look at the Bengals, who many options for your fantasy rosters this year for redraft. But Ed, as our resident Bengals enthusiast and Joey B fan club member, do you want to start off with Mr. Burrow himself?
Yeah, where else? Where else would we start but with old Joe Shiesty, Joe Cool? He has many nicknames. I just wish one
any
of
good
them was
ones.
my boyfriend. Now, as you can see from my background, I'm very much in love with Joe Burrow. But I mean, ultimately, when it comes to a fantasy redraft perspective, he is incredibly relevant and was even more so last year. So he had his best year in the NFL in 2024 as he threw for a league-leading 4,918 yards and 43 passing touchdowns. Basically, if he's fit for the whole season, then he will repay the faith that you put in him. He will just get through the volume. In his 3 seasons where he's completed every game, he's finished as QB3, QB4, and QB7. So, guaranteed fantasy points. What's been interesting over the last couple of years is that he seemed less reluctant to attack downfield, as only 7.8% of his attempts were 20 or more yards last year, which ranked him 29th. But then if you look at the other end of the spectrum, he had a league high 51.5% 0 to 10 yard receptions. So, shorter passes, but I mean, regardless of what he does, from a fantasy perspective, it's not really relevant as he will get the volume either way, especially with the weapons at his disposal. Now, O-line is, as always with the Bengals, an issue. There's been some tweaks, a new O-line coach who could make a difference, but wouldn't hold out that much hope. Last year, finishes QB3, as you can see, and he's going off the board at QB5 this year, which I think is probably fair in terms of what you'd expect from him. I think you've got the top tier of Josh Allen and Lamar, possibly Jaden Daniels in that top tier, and then Joe Burrow slots in beneath them, would you say?
I think for me, tier 1 is Lamar and Josh Allen. Tier 2 is Hurts, Daniels. And I think we had this exact conversation last year. I put Joe Burrow then in tier 3 on his own. I think he does fit into that tier 2 now. I can't see a way. If everyone plays every game,
yes,
I do think it's tough to call who's 3, 4, and 5 out of Hurts, Daniels, and Burrow.
Yeah, indeed. And I think, Burrow will, if he plays a full season, he'll be top 5. I don't see out of those, outside of the ones we've mentioned, anyone else getting near to him, just because, the game plan, the way the Bengals play, it goes through Burrow, doesn't it? And he'll get the volume. He's got some elite receivers who we'll talk about who'll make those contested catches. So, he's pretty much nailed on from a fantasy perspective in terms of paying you back. Where he's going off the board, late round 4, again, it depends on your strategy. I don't really tend to get many shares in Burrow because he goes off the board before I'm prepared to invest in him. But he doesn't let you down if you do.
A quick shout out to Ian of the JMD pod. That is the Jefferson My Drinks podcast on YouTube as well, who was hoping to join us on the show, but we've not been able to get times to it. He's sent his notes across for us as well then. And one thing that he's referenced is just how he said the word embarrassment for the Bengals O-line. And he's commented how that they've tried to patch up double dip in the draft. So Dylan Fairchild in the 3rd round, Jalen Rivers in the 5th round. So potentially, he said, putting Volson and Ford under pressure for the starting jobs. How are you feeling about the O-line this year?
I don't know. Yeah, it's a different strategy this year. They've invested heavily with the likes of Orlando Brown in the past, with some big money, and they've different strategy this year to do it through the draft, through the later rounds. I don't know. It undoubtedly will be a problem again. As I said, I'm hopeful that a new O-line coach, might make a difference, but I wouldn't say that I'm expecting that. But Burrow, he's coped for 5 years with a pretty bog standard O-line, to say the least. So I think he'll continue to kind of flourish from a fantasy perspective, regardless of the job the O-line does.
And another thing that Ian's mentioned, which definitely counts into how much Joby had to pass the ball and is favourable for Chase and favourable Higgins as well, is use that word again, embarrassment. Oh, no, sorry, he said pathetic this time regarding the showing from the Bengals defense. Now, I don't want to set you off on the Bengals defense. I know it makes you very, very cross. But bad defenses do help us with our offensive weapons when it comes to fantasy, don't they?
Yeah, I mean, ultimately, I suppose it's relevant from a fantasy perspective in that because the Bengals defense stinks so much, the offense has to step up every single game, and they find a way, and they're losing high-scoring games. So, as a Bengals fan, it's infuriating. But anyone with Bengals weapons in their fantasy team, long may the poor defense continue, because it's absolute gold dust for your teams.
Next up, we'll move to running back, and a player that you was banging the drum for long before we even knew he had a drum, Mr. Chase Brown.
Yes. Egg on my face in his rookie year, where I made some bold claims, and he ended up as running back 63. But last year, in his sophomore season, he really broke through. So he enters his third season, and last season he kind of started the season not really knowing exactly what sort of use he would get. He began by sharing the backfield duties with Zack Moss. But even before Moss's season was ended in week 9 with a neck injury, Brown was emerging as a clear RB1 in Cincinnati. I'll give you a few stats on him to show just how much he broke through last year. Between weeks 4 and 17, he had 9 RB1 weeks, which included 4 weeks that placed him in the top 5 running backs. 7 rushing touchdowns was solid, but his receiving game also took the eye. And to illustrate this, between weeks 9 and 14, which included the bye week, he hauled in 28 receptions for 241 yards and 2 touchdowns. He was a really kind of important target for Joe Burrow in that stretch. His ADP is RB12. And to be honest, I think that's probably about right, although there is a chance of him making the top 10, I would say. He will get the workload. And I thought maybe if I listed the 4 running backs directly ahead of him in the ADP and see what you think in terms of whether you would take them over Chase Brown. Should we play that game?
Oh, cite him.
So directly ahead of him, Kyren Williams.
I'd go Brown.
Yeah. Above him, Jonathan Taylor.
I like Taylor, so I'd definitely take Taylor over Brown.
Jacobs.
That's a tricky one. I want to say Chase Brown because it's the Bengals show.
Bucky Irving.
I'd take Bucky there as well. But I think for me, other than Jonathan Taylor, none of those are easy choices.
But if I'd asked you a similar scenario a year ago, it would have been, you wouldn't have been able to think, it would have been every single one of them over Chase Brown. So it shows
Except for possibly Bucky Irving, but even out of spite, I'd have said Bucky Irving then.
Yes, quite possibly. So, I think, Chase Brown is, he's in the position for a large workload again in 2025. And he could be a bit of a steal at RB12, but I've got a feeling that's probably where he will settle. He has got that high upside. But there are a couple of other targets for Joe Burrow, as we'll discuss.
Yeah, I've put him down as my RB10 on the season. And the difference between RB10 and RB12 in points when the season ends is neither here nor there, is it really? And also, we're obviously projecting this based on no one getting injured, everyone finishing the season. We know at running back that does not happen at all. Just a quick mention as well that we are recording this on the 11th of July. So if anything changes roster-wise, that is not taken into account. And also, all of our scoring is based on PPR points per reception scoring as well. I think something that counts in against Chase Brown, once again, is the O-line we've mentioned. So when we looked last year, Bengals O-line were 4th worst against run blocking. So expect some of those outside runs and swing plays, which is what Ian's put on his notes that he sent in to us. the players behind don't really panic you, I think is fair to say.
No, if you get shares in Chase Brown, I think you can be fairly confident that he's going to be a clear RB1. Zack Moss looks on track to be ready for the start of the season, and he reworked his contract to keep him on board. So he's clearly part of the plan, but he's going to struggle for workload and gives you no fancy guarantees. And the return of Samaje Perine returns to Cincinnati after a year with Kansas and a year in Denver. Will he carve out a role behind Chase Brown, or will he struggle for touches? I mean, who knows? Little question for you about Samaje Perine. How many RB1 weeks has he had in the NFL since his debut in 2017?
I have no idea whether this is going to be really high or really low. I would go really low. None.
Yeah, I thought that. I thought it could be as low as that. Okay. But no, it was 4. So he had 3 of them were back in 2022, and he had 1 in his debut season. But I'm just illustrating the point that Samaje Perine will not get you many fancy relevant weeks.
No, he'll have 1 week where he'll steal a touchdown that we wanted to go to Chase Brown that will annoy people and lose people weeks. And obviously, they brought in the rookie as well, Taj Brooks. He's excited to see him. Or do you think it's going to be a non-entity this year?
No, I mean, 6th-round pick. He's clearly not been drafted to compete with Chase Brown. So we'll see how he develops this year. I wouldn't be surprised to see him on the practice squad initially. But wait and see.
Please do take a moment to subscribe, like, and give us a share as well. Whilst you're here, then go and check out one of the other 31 shows as we profile all 32 teams through the offseason. If you watch this on day of release, you've only got the Ravens to go back to. If you're watching a bit later, go and check out one of the other shows. As we continue, the Bengals, as much as I'd like to say otherwise, are really, really fancy relevant in so many areas compared to some other teams that we've profiled. And no person more so than a player who is always a big player away from winning you a week from absolutely nowhere, Mr. Ja'Marr Chase, last year's wide receiver 1. Would you like to say lots of positive things about Ja'Marr Chase now, Ed?
Well, first thing I'll say is I'm very nervous because Ja'Marr Chase is currently the clear 101 pick in fantasy football, and we've discussed how cursed that position has been over the last few years. So I'm nervous. That's all I'll say. But I'll try to ignore that and focus on the positives. And of course, there are a ridiculous number when it comes to Chase. He comes back off the back of one of the best ever seasons for a receiver. He won the Triple Crown, which is most yards, most receptions, most receiving touchdowns. His 403 PPR points was the 4th most ever by a receiver, and he was only the 5th player to win the receiving Triple Crown since the merger in 1970. So some really impressive stats. I mean, surely the only way is down if you're a cup half empty kind of guy. Well, yes, but I think his season was so stellar that even like a 10, 15, 20% regression could still see him as the number 1 receiver. I think he's on track for another season, another big season. He signed his big contract and his telepathic partnership with Burrow looks set to continue. Even with the likes of Higgins snapping at his heels, I expect Chase to still be Burrow's number 1 target by a distance. Will he be wide receiver 1 again? Possibly. Is it guaranteed? Certainly not. There are some really impressive receivers about, of course. So, yeah, 101, he kind of deserves to be after the season that he had. But yeah, there's the pressure on him to perform, but he's proved that he can do that so far.
Can you remember when everyone was really worried because he said it was difficult to see the ball in his rookie training camp? That shows how little to pay. Yeah, it shows how little you pay attention to those things. It's always worth a reminder at this time of year about some of those stories. 17 touchdowns. I think we need to look at the possibility of touchdown regression. His previous high was 13. But even then, he was so far ahead. I think we've got a couple of massive games. 2 of those were against Baltimore. He scored almost 100 points in 2 games against Baltimore alone.
I'll say we lost both of those games before you said.
Oh, yeah. Sorry. Thank you for raising it. And we could say they are outliers and therefore they probably won't happen again. But he also had a monster game against Dallas. We got 45. I think we just know that Jamar Chase has it in him to get 2 or 3 40-plus point games a season. It's in the territory for him, isn't it? I do think he's best positioned to be wide receiver 1 this year. And T. Higgins, it's interesting that Ian's put the same as I would have said. I think he thrives with having T. Higgins. They both benefit from each other. Drawing coverage, don't they? I think it's one of those rare situations where they're both so good, it makes it really tricky for defenses to decide what to do. We could go on for ages about Jamar Chase, but if you've got the 101, you're probably going to take him. If you've got the 102 and he's still there, then you're definitely taking him. I think it is as easy as that. T. Higgins is next up, and not a huge concern for drop-off, but a little bit more difficult to project where you're going to be happy to take him, maybe.
Yeah, of course, and Joe Burrow got his wish. He was very vocal, and I think he's had a huge part in Higgins signing that huge 4-year, $150 million contract after playing out his franchise tag last year. I mean, you can question the strategy from the Bengals as they continue to largely ignore their defense, but in terms of fantasy managers, it's certainly is worthwhile. Let's be frank, Higgins is a wide receiver 1 on all but a few teams in the league. And despite competing with one of the best receivers in the league for touches, he's proved he's more than capable of holding his own. Now, he managed 12 games last season, the same as he did in 2023, but 6 of those games last season were wide receiver 1 weeks. Injuries, of course, are a concern, especially over the last couple of seasons when it comes to Higgins. They're always on my mind when I think about drafting him. Now, he's going off the board at wide receiver. It says 17 there, but he's kind of risen up draft boards recently. So,
that was where he finished last year. He finished as wide receiver 17 last year.
So he's going off the board about wide receiver 14, which I think, to be honest, is his absolute ceiling as far as I'm concerned. Absolute ceiling. Chase will be wide receiver 1, no question, and barring injuries. And so Higgins is always going to go much too early in drafts for me. He's never going to be a fancy monster while he's playing in Chase's shadow. It's great for Chase. It's great for Burrow. It's great for the Bengals. But in terms of fantasy, I think I'd just buyer beware when it comes to Higgins because, he's almost being drafted on his talent rather than his situation by some people. You lift him up and put T. Higgins, I don't know, in Baltimore or, just for example, he instantly becomes, a top 10 wide receiver. But yeah, buyer beware for me. He always goes too high.
I can't work out if I'm being too low, popping out wide receiver 18 to 24. I think possibly I'm being a little bit harsh there, but for everything you've just said, and we looked last year, the fact he was wide receiver 17 on 12 games, we've spoken a few times that to be a top 12 wide receiver, all that took you was to play every game pretty much. A lot of wide receivers missed a lot of time. So for me, that's why in that bubble of everyone playing every game, I think that's where he sits around that kind of somewhere around the wide receiver 20 for me. And I agree, I'm not going to get any T. Higgins if he's being drafted as wide receiver 14. It's just not going to happen. So that contract is massive. We know he's there to stay. Burrow, on the notes from Ian, says that Burrow attempted 652 passing attempts last year. So we know the work is there. And he said he feels that they could end up with 2 top 5 fantasy receivers in Cincinnati. I think that is extremely optimistic. But as we say on lots of different situations when we're talking stuff on the show, I can see a route to that happening. I don't think it's likely at all, but there is also a world where 2 top 10 wide receivers, I could see a world where that happens. I don't think it's going to, but I can see it being possible.
Well, look at Gibbs and Monty last year. I don't think anyone would have predicted the season that they had, and it was very much of the upside. So yeah, it is possible, but unlikely.
Let's take a look at the supporting cast at wide receiver then. Iosivas, Burton and Jones.
Yeah.
Is it fair to say no one's targeting any of those in their drafts for redraft, but all will... Well, I think Iosivas is definitely going to be spoken about at some point, isn't he?
Yeah, we spoke about him several times last year. He always seemed to let us down. Yoshi emerged as like wide receiver 3 last year, but behind Chase, Higgins, and Gesicki, who we'll talk about, that's not many touches. He works his socks off. He was heavily involved from a snap percentage, but only scored over 10 points on 4 occasions. Jermaine Burton, all the red flags in the world, and guess what? The Bengals drafted him, and guess what? He had disciplinary and fitness issues that meant he barely figured. I am hearing more positive noises coming out of preseason, but we'll wait and see. Avoid until he produces. And Charlie Jones was involved more as a returner last season, and I can't really see that changing.
So Ian on his notes has put an additional note around Jermaine Burton. So I'll read out what he sent as word for us. So I'm personally surprised that Jermaine Burton hasn't been cut due to his off-pitch indiscretions last season. Indiscretions is a very kind way to say someone's an idiot. He showed a walkthrough prior to the Raiders game, rocked up pitch side in his pajamas, went straight to a casino after a game. That's fair enough. Then we lost after the game, though we still lost in his Bengals attire. That's the thing to go when you've lost a game in your kind of uniform still. That's mega. But and then obviously issues that allegedly hit his girlfriend, was made a healthy scratch for last game against the Steelers. He said the fact he's still in the fold and getting rave reviews from camp means that there is some talent there, and he's been offered a path back to Zack Taylor's good books. This is where I think the Bengals have gone to prove. We spoke a few years ago how the Bengals were badly managed, and there were lots of questionable decisions all the time. Is this that actually Zack Taylor feels we can turn this player? There are good things here, or is it a poor decision to keep someone there? We'll find out through the season, but I think from a fantasy perspective, I don't think we need to be too concerned about him, really.
No, leave him alone. It's all down to him to prove, isn't it? So I'm not very hopeful because he showed nothing last year apart from idiocy.
Let's do something that we frequently do. In fact, I think we've done every year we've ever had the podcast. Let's get over optimistic about a Bengals tight end, only for them to go on to do very little all season. Now, I've been more cautious by saying streamable tight end on this. Are you gonna be sensible, or are you gonna talk up a Bengals tight end and nothing happens again?
Well, I think we talked up Gesicki last year, and I think he delivered. Maybe not to heights, but I think he delivered on where he was being drafted. As you can see, he was being drafted last year as 26 and ended up as 13. So I think fantasy managers are sleeping on him again, because this year he's at a similar sort of level. He's down at tight end 24, which I just find absolutely baffling. He reignited his career last year, I thought, behind after a couple of lackluster seasons it was Miami and New England, wasn't it? And he's been rewarded 3-year contract. He ranked 8th amongst tight ends in receptions and 10th in yards. Great hands, very reliable for target for Burrow in tight situations. He's never in his career really been a red zone threat, and that's an area that he can look to improve. He only got 2 touchdowns last season, but part of the issue with Gesicki is that he's got quite subpar blocking, so that keeps him off the field near the goal line. So I think he'll still rely on his receptions and yards to get decent fantasy points. I just don't see how he doesn't have a similar season to last year. And I'd expect another top 15 finish. He'll get the targets despite competing with Higgins and Chase. And, we've talked about the also-rans at receiver. I think he's the third receiver, isn't he? And in a Bengals offense that gets through high volume, he'll be, knocking on the door, I think, of top 10 tight ends. So I think people are sleeping on him, and I'd go slightly higher on him than a streamable tight end. I think, that there aren't that many better than him from a redraft perspective. But I can see why people would project him as a streamable tight end.
Well, that's why I think streamable tight end, anyone that is going to finish lower than tight end, probably 7, is streamable in my books, because it's so inconsistent to that point. So at tight end 13, he only had 5 top 12 finishes. If you're outside the top 12 at tight end, unless it's a big tight end week, you're doing very little of any relevance, I feel. One thing about Mike Gesicki, I'm sure we will both agree on, is that, and I've put this, that's why I've chosen the picture that's on the screen. He does the worst version of the Griddy in the entire NFL, possibly
He tries.
the world.
He tries.
He tries. He should probably, I would say, if he spent any time trying to perfect his Griddy in that, just keep working on having safe hands. The thing at tight end with the Bengals is that we know people are going to crop up at some point. Now, Erick Jr. obviously is out for the season. He's a player we were really high on watching. Obviously, it's reported he's very likely to miss the whole season. He's a player that we were really excited to see coming through last year. I think he was a pick for us on Fantasy Game, the Red Hot pick several times. So that's helps Gesicki, but also means that I am in no doubt whatsoever that Drew Sample and Tanner Hudson at some point will each have a 2-touchdown week that makes them fantasy relevant, and then we'll do nothing probably the rest of the time.
Almost certainly, yeah. I mean, I was really gutted about all last year because he showed great flashes, but he got that horrible torn ACL, which ended this season, and as you've said, probably most of this season. So a really horrible injury. So we'll have to wait and see how he comes back from that. Drew Sample and Tanner Hudson, they'll compete for reps behind Gesicki, but neither will be even close to being fantasy relevant, apart from 1 week, and we will never know when that will be. So we'll look out for that week. But don't draft Sample or Hudson.
Back to Gesicki as well. The one thing I want to mention is I think that looking at current ADP, Darren Waller is now starting to slowly climb that. I wouldn't hesitate to take Gesicki over Waller because I think we're at least confident in what Gesicki can do. Waller is unknown. It's probably a fair pairing. If you wanted to double tap on tight ends later in your draft, Gesicki Waller combo could be something you might consider. To wrap us up then, Ed, what do you think the Bengals will do this season? Do you think they are going in a very tough AFC North that the Steelers have just made tough, which is very infuriating? What do you think the outlook looks for them this season?
Yeah, I still think, the Ravens, I think, are the strongest team. I think they look favourites. Browns don't look like favourites. And the Steelers will always be strong. It's not been a good off-season. The Shamar Stewart, our first-round draft pick, the whole Ferrari surrounding that. There's been some ridiculous things written about that. And I don't think the Bengals have been entirely painted in a good light. I think he's been very, very badly advised. But it's just our draft strategy worries me. There were so many red flags with him, yet we still went ahead. Like with Burton, we don't seem to be learning our lessons. I think Zack is kind of like a bit of an optimist. He thinks, I'll save them, I'll make them good, and it just doesn't work. So, to give you a short answer to your question, our offense will do well. Our defense probably won't, and will probably just miss out on the playoffs again. I'm not massively confident at the moment, but we'll see. We need a strong start, which we never get.
I do think it's fair to say that the Bengals will be an entertaining watch nonetheless. And as always, we will absolutely look forward to the Ravens-Bengals derbies as well. Well, that brings the show to a close. Please, said before, why don't you now go and check out one of the other deep dive shows? If you're watching this on day of release, then make sure you go and check out the Ravens show. We'll have one show coming every single day for the next 30-odd days. But for now, that is all from me. It's all from Ed and Malcolm. Take us home.
You have been listening to Pestle and Ed of TH Fantasy Football. For more content, follow TH_fantasy_NFL on Instagram and Twitter.